Hey guys and girls, Board now back with Rachel McDonald, and we have reached the end game now for The Haunting of Hill House. So this is episode 10, the finale. It's Silence Lay Steadily, and so we finally get to the conclusion and to the reveals of exactly what happened that very last night at Hill House, and really finally we see exactly why Hugh has been keeping it buried all these years and doing it to sort of protect his kids. And the episode has an interesting structure because it kind of replays these different moments from each sibling's point of view. And it obviously leads to them getting to the house to try and save Luke. There's obviously a frantic thing to save him in time because he is in danger and live and now in the red room, basically, if you want to put it like that. So it actually has this structure that, like, when you're watching it, because this was the first time in a few years I'd seen it, so I'd actually forgotten they did it like this. But you sort of have stuff where because I was a bit confused at like the way it opened with Steve and his wife Lee, and they were having a conversation, and Lee appeared to be pregnant, and I was like, okay, yeah, I don't really remember that happening. Like Steve trying to write the next sort of Hill House book in a way, and having like writer's block, and it soon becomes a nightmarish sort of thing where she's like throwing all this stuff back in his face, and it's sort of saying about how just like accusing him of being like a parasite sort of thing, that kind of stuff. And you sort of have these scenes with all of them where it's almost like the house bringing up their worst sort of memories and what have you, and it then leads into them in the house trying to save Luke, so arriving at the house separately. I mean, actually, the most sort of powerful one in a way was actually Sherry's for me for some reason. I'm not sure why, but there's a scene where she's at like a funeral, like conference type thing, and it's in the past. So we were talking about this in another episode where it actually reveals her to be a little bit of a hypocrite in the way she's like criticized Theo and her husband Kevin, because there's this stuff with her and this guy, and at first, because the way these scenes play out is it sort of has a different spin on what happened, and in the initial spin it sort of makes it look like Sherry actually did the right thing, like this guy approaches her and they have a nice conversation throughout the night, but she makes it clear to him that nothing more can happen. But in reality, something more did sort of happen. And it's just sort of a really sad scene, I sort of find, with Sherry. Yeah, that sort of hit me because it's sort of her in her element at like a funeral conference or thing. And almost this is the sort of way she would connect with someone. The Theo scene as well, like, is quite sort of powerful. I forget the name of her girlfriend, but it's the scene between them. Trish, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, it sort of goes to like the intimacy issues with Theo sort of thing, and the way the scene plays out, and that's visually is quite a good horror type scene because of like the blue hands that sort of come at Theo in that scene, and the way the horror like manifests itself.
In the previous episode, as we talked about, we finally saw what happened on the night in question. We saw that Olivia tried to murder her own children and actually did succeed in killing the Dudley's child. So this episode, we get the biggest reveal that we've ever gotten, which is about the house and the red room. So the opening scene we see is actually a scene that we've seen before. In an earlier episode, we saw Shirley and little Nell. So little Shirley and little Nell trying to get into the red room. They're banging on the door.
Yeah.
They try to get in with a key, and then they walk away, and you see a shadow under the door, and you think, oh crap, there's a ghost in there. Then we see a completely separate scene where Theo is dancing in a room, and she hears banging on the doors, and she goes to the door, and the doorknob shakes. And in this episode, we get the reveal that those two scenes are simultaneous, that Theo is actually in the red room while Shirley and Nell are trying to get in. So that right there gives you an indication that there is something definitely supernatural about this room. The fact that the girls couldn't get in, but Theo was already in the room. So I thought that was a great opener. And then I really like the misdirection with the scene with Steve, where you see his wife is pregnant. You assume that they've reconciled. They talk about what happened on that last night in the house. And you think, oh, we're going to get the story of what happened on that night. And then Steve kind of stops and he's like, I don't remember. I remember that Dad and I went to the house, and then I don't remember what happened. And that's when Lee starts to talk about, you know, how he's a parasite. She's like, Luke died. And he's like, no. And she's like, yes, he did. You need to write that Luke died. And I actually think the transformation of Lee, because you see her belly start to get bigger and bigger, and then she pulls up her shirt and you see that there's the mold from the house is spreading over her belly, and then she slowly turns into a corpse, which is possibly one of the coolest and most horrifying effects in the series. And that's when you get the reveal that Steve is already there and already in the red room. Now, each of the siblings have their little imagined spot. Like you said, you've got Shirley's, you've got Theo's, and then Luke's his imagined spot is that he saved Joey, his friend from rehab. And if you notice in every single one of the scenes, there is an indication that they're in the room by the fact that every single scene has a red motif. So in every scene, there is something significant that is red, which is indicating that they're in the red room. So Steve is wearing a red shirt in his scene. Shirley's wearing a red shirt in her scene. In Luke's scene, he's wearing red sneakers. And in Theo's scene, Trish is wearing red underwear. So when you watch the episode with that knowledge, it actually becomes very cool that there is that motif. And then you see that the house has managed to get all 4 Crane siblings into that room. And in the most horrifying twist, it has tricked Luke into injecting rat poison directly into his arm. And they're desperately trying to save him. And what I think is really beautiful is we actually see Nell come and save all of her siblings by taking them out of the hallucination off the house. We've seen earlier in the series that the house affects everyone differently. Olivia talks about how all of the girls in the family have this kind of heightened sense. Like Shirley has dreams, Theo has the touch thing, Olivia herself gets her migraines, and Nell seems to have some sort of control or exertion over the house once she's dead. She's able to, I think that's why she sees the Bentnet lady so frequently. It's like within the house, she can see and predict her own death. And she's able to get all of her siblings out of their respective hallucinations. And I remember coming across this analysis, which I thought was so good, of the way that she touches each of her siblings correlates to their biggest kind of trait. So she touches Steve on the head, because he's such a cynic, he's always using his head, his brain, instead of like listening to his instincts and his heart. She cups Shirley's face because Shirley is always closed off but does want intimacy. She grabs Theo's hand because Theo always uses her hands to feel things. So I thought that was really interesting. And that's where we get the reveal that the red room has been a different room for every single one of them. And I thought that was one of the best reveals in the series. So it was Luke's treehouse, it was Steve's game room, it was Nellie's playroom, it was Theo's family room, no, Theo's dance studio, and it was Shirley's family room. Because when you rewatch the series, there are little subtle hints that the room doesn't actually exist. Like when Nellie finds the cup of stars, she says, I found it in the playroom. And Mrs. Dudley's like, what room? And then when the mother says, I'm going to be in my reading room, little Luke is like, which one's her reading room? Yeah. And when Steve says, have you checked the treehouse for Luke? Olivia's like, very funny. So you don't notice it the first time around, but when you rewatch knowing what the room is or knowing that they have all been in the room before, it's really cool. And then when you see the different versions of the room, you see that there's this one window that is always present to indicate that it's the same room. So, and then you get that reveal from Nell that the room itself is like the stomach of the house and that it is actually slowly eating them. And that goes back to what we were talking about in the previous review of the fact that this house is alive and is actually feeding on their energy. And for some reason, it really likes the Cranes, and it obviously is wanting to, you know, to take them. And I found that whole reveal like so well done. And I thought it was like a great scene, Nell with her siblings. And while that's happening, Hugh is stuck outside the door and actually sees Olivia's ghost, her actual ghost, for the first time. Because he does say to her, you know, I've carried you with me. And she's like, oh, but love, that wasn't me. And that goes back to that whole theme of what is a ghost. And Steve actually has a really nice speech at the end of the episode about, again, what is a ghost. And you see that people sometimes just carry ghosts with them to help them through. You know, Hugh carrying the image of Olivia with him helped him. She was like his like little Jiminy Cricket, you know, whispering in his ear. But when he finally sees her, we can see that the house has definitely changed her and changed her ghost. She still wants to take her children. She still wants to kill them and have them with her. And I think that's quite horrifying. And yeah, that just the whole Red Room reveal. And I think that Luke's hallucination is very interesting because I think he actually does die. Like, I think they're trying to bring him back to life, and I think he does die because he wakes up in the Red Room, but it's white, and his mother's there, and Nell's there, and Abigail is there. And Olivia says, we've been waiting for you. And little Nell, and again, this is another callback to, do you remember in the episode where they bury Nell at the grave, Luke sees his mother in the grave and she's yelling, stay, and then he looks up and Nell is there and she says, don't go.
Yeah.
That's this scene. Like in this scene, we get that repeat. So again, it's this brilliance that this show has of these echoes and the way that time is not linear, especially after death. And Nell talks about that, how time, like death takes you out of time and it takes you out of certain places. And so I thought that was all done just really, really well.
Sparse type flashbacks because it sort of means there's less clues, like, and I think there is a logic to it where if you did live in a house this big, I think it would feel more natural than there's rooms that the kids don't know what room that is. I mean, obviously in this case, it's just that they didn't, you know, it's because this Red Room doesn't really exist, but it's like you would have that sense of, where the hell's her reading room sort of thing. So it's actually a good misdirect because there's sort of logic to it, and it's a good reveal. It's a really good reveal, and those scenes are like really sort of haunting and powerful, and the whole stuff with like the Dudleys and Abigail, I think is really good stuff, and the whole because I think it also makes a lot of sense when you consider how the Dudleys have been acting throughout the show, and it makes sense when you think about, well, what's going on with them. I mean, what is their attachment to this house, and obviously the deal they make at the end with Hugh and stuff. And I actually like the stuff about then later on Steve has to carry on that sort of bargain that Hugh makes with them. Logical reason why Hugh has been keeping this stuff locked away from the Sith for years, and that it's like Steve, once he has that knowledge and once the father's obviously passed on, Steve now has to carry that burden because obviously they stay behind on purpose, and when the rest of the siblings leave, personal moment between father and son, which is a big thing in their relationship because obviously they maybe more than ever have had this fractured relationship, more than anyone I should say. So it's almost quite striking that it's Steve who's left with this responsibility. And I think it's one of the things I like about Steve's story and this episode is then because he is like the storyteller, and he's gathered this like role within the family and understanding things. It's I like the ending, how poetic it is with his words.
That Steve finally actually sees the ghost. We see that scene where he and his father go into the house, and for the first time ever, Steve actually realizes that what he's seeing are ghosts. They have that beautifully tense moment where the tall man bends down in front of him, and his dad's like, just look at me, Steve, focus on me. And you see his dad helping him through that. So yeah, so we obviously we'll come back to the end scene with the Dudleys soon. I just wanted to quickly talk about the final scene with Nell and her siblings, because after she's brought them all out, she appears to them when Luke comes back to life. And I really like that. First of all, we get her little explanation about how time is not linear for her, how she kind of, the moments kind of just fall around her like confetti, which is a beautiful analogy.
Yeah, it's a great speech, yeah.
Yeah, and we get some closure. So she's still dead, which is horrible, and they're still going to have to grieve her death. But they at least get to realize that she didn't commit suicide, that the house actually took her. And maybe that gives them a little bit of peace, knowing that, you know, she didn't kill herself. And then I really like, she has a little conversation with each of them. Theo says, I'm sorry, our last words were in anger. And Nell's like, they weren't our last words. Shirley apologizes for not picking up the phone. And Nell points out that you did pick up the phone so many times. And Steve apologizes for not believing her. And she says it wouldn't have made a difference. And then, you know, I love her little, you know, they actually get a little bit of closure with Nell, and they finally get to, you know, they get to see her, they get to apologize, and she gets to save them, which I think is so beautiful. And you have these two main big characters that died, Olivia and Nell, and they kind of work as opposite forces. Olivia wants to doom them to the house, and Nell wants to save them from the house. And so I think it's beautiful that while their mother tried to doom them, their sister was able to come and save them. And then, of course, you see Hugh and Olivia, and Hugh's like, you have to let them go. It goes back to what we were talking about in a previous review about childhood, about your fears about your children, about, you know, the big adult fear of what happens when they go out into the world, when you can't protect them. Hugh and Olivia kind of rehash that. And then Hugh's like, if you let them go, I will make you a promise that, you know, that I will keep for the rest of my life. And then you see the red door opening, and they take Luke's body out, and there's a great scene, well, not Luke's body, Luke's alive, but there's a great little shot where Steve and Hugh are carrying Luke's body, and Steve looks at something, and you don't see what he sees, but Hugh just kind of looks at him, and Steve's like, okay. Then they take Luke out to the car, the girls drive off with Luke to go to the hospital, and Hugh's like, you didn't tell them what you saw. And then it's revealed that he saw Hugh's body, that Hugh decided to die and be there with Olivia. And then you get to see the scene that you were talking about, where you see the Dudleys came and they saw that Olivia had killed their daughter, and then they saw their daughter's ghost, and they were able to hug her ghost. And then there's that deal that you were talking about. So we find out that the reason that Hugh allowed the house to stand was so the Dudleys could see their daughter, so that they could be with their daughter. And I thought that was so beautiful and so heartbreaking. And I really like that you see at the end, when we're seeing the montage of everything that's going on, you see Mr. Dudley running through the woods with his wife in his arms because she's dying, and he takes her to the house and places her there. And then you see her not only with their daughter Abigail, but with the baby that they lost. And I was a wreck by then. I was like full on bawling by that point in time. I was just gone. But I do like that after they leave the house and Steve, you know, leaves the house and has the promise, you see that their lives start to improve. So you see that Steve reconciles with his wife, and he goes back and he admits that he was wrong. He admits that he wasn't a great son, that he wasn't a great brother or husband, and he says that he wants to do better. And I think that was really beautiful. And that's when he gives his thing about how he's walked with ghosts his whole life, because ghosts are regret and their wishes and their things that you don't say. And again, that plays into that whole thing that I've said so many times over these reviews of what is a ghost. And I think that is such a great theme that this series has of what is a ghost. A ghost is whatever you make it. It's what you carry with you. It's your regret. It's your loss. It's your grief. And I think that scene with Steve and his wife really emphasizes that. We see Shirley reconcile with her husband. If I was her husband, I wouldn't forgive her, but that's just me. I just don't like Shirley. And of course, Shirley, we've seen her carry that ghost with her. We've seen the guy pop up several times before, with the glass. And so we finally get that reveal of who he is. And you see Theo finally step forward with a relationship and
that was good. I like
take the gloves off. Yeah, I like that.
The whole
and
thing
then
with glove, that's a good metaphor.
yeah, I thought that was a really nice way to show that Theo's finally opening herself up and deciding to, have a relationship and be open to her gift. And then you have that final shot of Luke with the cake, and you see that he's 2 years sober. And again, I lost it again at that scene. I was like blubbering again because it was so powerful. But did you know that the original end scene, in that scene there, Flanagan was originally going to put the window from the Red Room in that scene to kind of hint that they never actually got out of the Red Room. And then he decided, no, that would be too cruel. Like, it was just too much. But part of me that actually would have been a really sinister ending. That could have been cool. But I agree. I'm like, let's just let the Cranes find their peace and move on. They've been through enough. But that would have been an interesting ending. Yeah. But did you like final bits of the episode or the closure?
Oh yeah, and I think it earns it. I think it earns that there is at least a sense of hope for the future with them by the end, and I think everything it does dramatically pays off, and there's a whole sort of logic to it, and like whose actions, and it definitely goes back to some of the themes. And I did like the sense of hope. And again, there's a lot of good horror, a lot of good visuals. The Nell plays a key part. I think partly in just saving her twin. Again, it goes back to how close they are as twin. Luke was set for a tragic end. So
yes, definitely.
It definitely had me with that. I mean, maybe because I'd not seen it for a while, but I was actually sold on Luke had died when I rewatched this earlier. So it was a good reveal that actually he does survive in the end. And I think the way the scene plays out, you definitely at one point you're convinced that he's a goner. So it's sort of really profound that it's now that sort of there to make sure this doesn't go down like this. And it's a cathartic scene, the stuff with her and the siblings. One complaint I think with the episode for some people, I think, is that they feel this is the episode where the CGI comes out a bit too much with certain things. I don't know what you think about that. I'm assuming.
No, I didn't. I mean, which parts would it be? Like the ghost part? I didn't notice anything that wasn't. I thought it all looked fine.
A bit more CGI because obviously each sibling has a moment, like the stuff with Lee, for example, and the belly. But
no, I thought that was great.
Visual effects are really good. I think it maybe stands out more this time because there's a bit more of them because you're getting to the finale. But no, I didn't have a problem with it. I thought the end, and I think some people maybe feel the final episode is where it gets a bit too, saccharine and stuff. But I mean, I don't think so. I think they get the right balance.
Yeah, I think they get the right balance. And I think that, like, people saying it's too saccharine and stuff, it's like, look, I know that it looks like it's all tied up in a neat bow, but what we have to remember is that we haven't seen the behind the scenes. So we don't know how long it took Steve and his wife to reconcile, or Shirley and her husband. We just get to see them finally be happy. And given that they finally got some closure on what actually happened that night, what happened in that house, that's what's always been holding them back, the unknown, the uncertainty. They have the answers now. So I think it makes sense that now that they have the answers, they're able to move forward, because, I mean, that's kind of how trauma works. You have to work through it. You have to confront it and figure out your feelings surrounding it. And I mean, you can make up any kind of headcanon for the next couple of years. You could say maybe they all went to therapy. Maybe they started seeing each other more often. I like I said, part of me is like, the window ending would have been kind of cool. It would have been kind of spooky, but let's let the Cranes have their happiness because they haven't had it for so long. So I think you mentioned earlier that it feels earned. I agree with that. Like it feels like they've earned the right to be happy and to go on. And I think if you complain that it's too saccharine, you might maybe be missing the point of, like, it wasn't supposed to be a tragic ending. It was supposed to be an ending that was bittersweet, and it is. I mean, they still lost their sister, and then they lost their father as well. So now they're going to be grieving their dad too. So, you know, it's not like it was perfectly all tied up in a neat little bow. It just shows that they were able to find a way to go on living and to honor their mother and their sister and their dad. So I think the ending was beautiful. I really like when Steve sees the younger version of his dad, and his dad says, you know, being your father made me so proud. And I especially like you for Steve, who had the most fractured relationship with his father and has such a nice character arc and journey. I think it was really important for Steve to have that final moment, you know, with his dad. And I just thought that was beautiful. They do sneak a tiny little bit of malevolence in. If you look at Hugh goes into the red room and embraces Nell and Olivia. Now, Nell has her eyes closed and looks happy, but Olivia's just kind of staring at Steve with like this wide-eyed look, like, oh, I'll get you one day. So it's almost like hinting that Olivia still hasn't given up on the idea of taking her children. So there's a little bit of, you know, spooky still tucked in there. But no, I thought this was a brilliant finale. I thought it brought all the characters full circle. We got all the answers that we wanted. There was some nice reveals. There was some really nice spooky stuff, and just definitely emotional. Like, I was just sobbing for like the last 10 minutes of the episode, just having a good old cry.
Great storytelling. I think it brings everything together really nicely. But and yeah, there's a sense to it. I mean, obviously, sometimes it can be a bad thing if something ties things up too much. But I think a lot of this is payoff for what we've had, and like you said, it's not like it's a clear-cut thing. It's not like saying everything's going to be rosy in that sense, but it's just a sense of they can move on with their lives and have some sort of a future. And obviously there's a lot of darker stuff tied up in it as well. So it's, I think it's really good. I think it's a really strong finale. And yeah, the special effects didn't really bother me. I mean, I thought they were well done and looked good. And, you know, I understand sometimes if you overdo it, it can, but it still felt like quite sparse the way they were used, and it didn't feel like overdone.
Fantastic series, so good.
Yeah, I definitely got a lot out of it rewatching it this time, and obviously having the discussions with you, and it's definitely one of the best things I've seen in recent years on, you know, I mean, I say TV show, but a streaming show as a bit of TV. So cinematic. Obviously, it's important that Flanagan has that background. He is a movie director, so he makes it so visual, so cinematic, so sort of powerful in that way, and so immersive. But it's the best of both worlds, where you have a really good character drama, and it's obviously rich with detail and themes, because there's so much, you know, you and I can get from it, from our own experiences, or just the way we see the world. And, you know, there's light and dark to every character, which is often the best shows have. And I think, just to say personally, Theo is one of my favourite modern characters. I think she is the standout character for me of the series. I think, if I was going through like great recent characters, I think she would be one of them. She's so rich and compelling, and but yeah, obviously through our reviews and discussions, I've also come to appreciate Steve a bit more. You know, I don't. It definitely has douchey moments, but definitely not. I'm not as anti-Steve as I was when we started to get stuff out of it, because obviously, as I said, some of the stuff with Luke, you know, I had a brother who suffered from addiction, so I mean that stuff hit home quite strongly with me.
Just great direction, fantastic characters, and I just really love the blend of horror and emotion. Like, when I first watched this series, I was equally scared and emotional. It just had everything that you kind of wanted. The characters are fantastic. I agree that Theo is a fantastic character, is one of the standout. My favorite is, and I think I said this right at the beginning, is Steve. It has always been Steve. As an eldest sibling, I definitely relate to the whole, you need to look after your younger siblings, and the shame that you feel when you feel like you've let them down and you haven't been the best big sibling that you can. I think Steve has probably the best arc as well. Like, he comes the furthest over the course of the series, like in the way that he grows and he has to change his perspective. But I think all the other characters, even the ones that I'm not particularly fond of, like Shirley, I think they're so well written. They all have layers and nuances to them. There's always, like, with every character, there's more than what's going on than what you see, So you initially see Shirley and you think she's just a control freak, but then you find out where her control issues come from. I think the show does a really good job at explaining all of the characters' actions so that even if you're not agreeing with what they're doing, you can understand why they're doing it. I think Hugh is a fantastic character as well. And I just really like the way the show gives you the pieces of the puzzle bit by bit, and you have to kind of piece it together until you finally get that whole complete picture at the end, and you can look back and realize what everything was telling you. I actually think this show gets better on rewatches because you start to see things that you didn't see before, and you start to understand deeper meanings. Like I said, Luke's visions, a lot of Steve's behavior, even Nell, just all of them, you get to see. It just gets richer and richer, I think, every time you rewatch it. And it's not a show you can watch often because it is very heavy. You leave the show and you're like emotionally just kind of like drained, like you just want to watch something light afterwards to kind of, feel a bit happier. But it's such a great show, and it was just the way it played out. I think there were a couple of episodes that maybe lagged a little bit, but aside from that, everything was just great. The direction's just fantastic. I'm pretty sure Flanagan directed every single episode of this show.
I'm pretty sure he did, yeah. So
that's a big undertaking, to do. I mean, I know it's only 10 episodes, but still, to direct all 10 episodes, that's pretty amazing and pretty intense.
And that obviously sets the tone. That means each one has a distinct sort of feel, deals with some dark, disturbing themes. But deals them in a sophisticated sort of way where you can talk more about them and have that discussion, and you sort of get more out of them. I think
definitely
been great doing it, great discussing it. And a really good, satisfying finale, which is so important, especially since this is the end of the whole show, sort of thing, So when you have a finale like that, it takes on even greater, importance when it is actually the end of the story. It's not just the end of a season, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So this as a complete finale, I think, pretty much ticks all the boxes, pretty much does everything it needs to do. So let us know your thoughts in the comments below on the finale of Hill House, on Hill House in general. What do you think about it? Do you have a favourite character? Which character would you sort of have an allegiance to, if you like? What are your thoughts on some of the characters and some of the themes and the direction of the show and stuff like that? And you can also look out for our Stranger Things reviews, because now that we've done with Hill House, we will be moving on to Stranger Things. So another big Netflix show, that'll be our next review. TV-wise, our next big TV sort of watch through, where we'll be building up to the new season, which comes out later in the year. And before we go, Rachel, if you want to promote your channel, you can do.
Yeah, so guys, follow me at Rachel McDonald, video essays covering TV shows and movies. You can also follow my Twitter and my Tumblr. Both the links are on my YouTube channel. Mostly follow me on Tumblr. I'm not very active on Twitter, but I will pop in from time to time. So Rachel McDonald, just follow me everywhere.
I do horror movie reviews generally, and so we tend to work our way through franchises. So we've recently come to an end of the Scream franchise for now, obviously, and you can look forward to us also doing like a rankings video for the Scream franchise, so look out for that video coming soon. and we'll be working our way through more franchises. So the Wrong Turn franchise is the next one we will be doing on the channel, and I'll put the link to Rachel's channel in the description as well. But thanks as always, guys. I hope you enjoyed us doing this TV show, and we'll be coming back soon with our first Stranger Things review. So look out for those on the channel, and we'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.